The proposed nationwide protest set for August 1st has drawn attention as comments from different quarters. Economic analysts and warned that the protest could lead to significant financial losses for the country, emphasizing that such disruption could impact key sectors, including trade, manufacturing, transportation, leading to widespread chaos and further aggravating the economic situation. While some argue that it may be poorly timed, given recent government effort to address economic woes, others say this reflects a broader sentiment among Nigerians on the state of the economy. Well, I have two guests to start my conversation. Yes, I'm being joined by Dr. Muda Yusuf, who is the Chief Executive Officer of the Center for the Promotion of Private Enterprises, and Mr. Mukhtar Mohammed, CEO, Finance with Mukhtar. Good afternoon. Thank you so much for joining the program.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon. Good afternoon, Mukhtar.
All right.
Thank you, Doctor. Good afternoon, Doctor.
Dr. Yusuf, I think I'm going to start with Dr. Den. Dr. Yusuf, let me start with this question from your end. Now, clearly, as many would say, the three highly ranked presidential candidates in the last election agreed to remove subsidy. But many would say that after removing subsidy, what next? That was the question many were asking. Now subsidy is gone, and we're also trying to unify the exchange rate. We now see the fallout of all of this, which has been projected this way. What do you make of these reforms, and how much more time do we have to wait for us to start to see the positives of this? It's a big question, I know, but I'd like to really start on that note before we go down to what the protest means for the economy.
Yeah, thank you very much, Tulu. Let me start by saying that those reforms were necessary and they were inevitable because the economy was already practically on the brink at the inception of this administration. Although this may not be obvious to a lot of people, but there's a lot of hole that has been dug, digging one hole to fill the other. There have been several instances in terms of, this forward sales of our crude, which are depleted both the current and future incomes in terms of foreign exchange. We had massive, outstanding mature obligations of forex, which needed to be met by the central bank. We have currency swap issues. We had, tax credits, which meant that a lot of taxes from many major taxpayers have been taken upfront for the construction of roads and so on and so forth. These were major challenges. And concurrently, the economy was bleeding profusely, both from the subsidy regime and from the administrative allocation of foreign exchange. So if we had to sustain the economy and to keep the economy afloat, there was no way we could have avoided those reforms. This may not be very clear to the ordinary people, but that is the reality. So as to whether the timing was wrong or not, well, for this kind of reform, there's hardly a perfect timing for it. Because anytime you do it, there will be these consequences, no matter what time you do it. What I can admit to is the fact that the social consequences of those reforms, we didn't respond speedily and adequately to those social consequences. That, for me, is a major issue that I can say that it was an omission in the whole reform process. But happily, the government has now been rolling out quite a number of measures, to deal with these issues of the cost of living and all of that were triggered by these reforms. But the inevitability of those reforms is not something that we can contest. The timing, well, there is no perfect timing for this kind of thing, because if you have identified a source of major bleeding of the economy, you have to stop the bleeding immediately. That is what the government did. Unfortunately, it came with all these consequences, but again, perhaps the government could have responded differently to those consequences, particularly the social consequences of the reforms.
Mr. Mukhtar Mohammed now, yes, I think I also like your views. Do you also agree that this policies instituted by this administration were necessary and inevitable, just like Dr. Yusuf said?
So, you know my stand about subsidy for years. For me, those policies should have been implemented maybe in 2000 and during the Jonathan administration. I've always said subsidy to go. So I agree with all what Dr. Muda have said about the surgery. But you know, like I always say, if you are supposed to do a surgery maybe 10, 15 years ago and you do it after 15 years, the pain is very painful. It's more painful than if you have done it earlier on, where you still have age on your side. You've added 15 years to your age at that time. So I think that is where the problem is. It's not that these policies are not policies that are needed. Like he said, the economy was bleeding. It was not only bleeding internally, it was bleeding externally also. Because internal bleeding would have done with only local issues, but we have international issues that have to do with crude oil theft, exchange rate volatility, and a lot of fiscal policy that were open to corruption. And one of those fiscal policy was payment of subsidy. So I totally agree that no government, like you said, all the three presidential aspirants before they said that subsidy will go. But again, the way and manner they would have implemented their own, now we can't say whether they would outrightly say subsidy should go or would have had a different game plan. But again, I think that was necessary. I totally agree. The floating of the Naira, I was in one of your programs and I said, the challenge with the Naira was not floating the Naira. The challenge with the Naira was liquidity. I agree with the floating of the Naira to make willing buyers, but I thought that we should have had enough liquidity to intervene when we need to intervene, not just because we have to intervene.
Let me take you back to Dr. Yusuf now. Response to the consequences of this is what has brought us this far. So what do you make? How would they have been better handled? Yes, we saw state governors and, in collaboration with the federal government, increased FAC in the first place. And many would expect more from the states, because I like us to focus on federal and states now, not just federal. People need to understand that there was an increase in FAC and more expectations from the governors. How does that come to you, Dr. Yusuf, with regards to response to the consequences?
Well, some of the positive outcomes of the reforms was the improvement in revenue. You could say that you had almost 100% jump in FAC allocation to the different levels of government as a result of the savings that accrued from the subsidy removal. Unfortunately, over the last 6 months, the subsidy seems to have even been creeping back. Unfortunately.
In. Yeah.
Yes. Because of, the variables in the macroeconomic environment, but that's a different conversation. Now, again, the foreign exchange convergence was also a major source of additional revenue, because these were revenues that those who are benefiting from the arbitrage, were creaming off over the years, and that had made many people billionaires. So those revenues are now back to the Federation account. So there was an improvement. So in terms of responding to the consequences, the states have as much responsibility as the federal. Unfortunately, in our environment, we tend to federalize all issues. If anything goes wrong, even in our backyard, we feel that it is a federal government issue. We have that mindset. Anything that goes wrong in the economy is about the federal. So the states have responsibility. The federal has responsibility. The federal has bigger responsibility in the area of policy and some major infrastructure spending. policy in terms of getting our fiscal policy to be very appropriate and very responsive, our trade policy to be appropriate and responsive, our monetary policy to be appropriate and responsive, and to ensure that our regulatory institutions work in tandem with what the president wants to achieve. That is also very, very important. Then the bureaucracy also work in a way to support the delivery of government programs. That is very important, because no matter how good your programs are, if the bureaucracy does not support it, or if the machinery of delivery is still as outdated and as complacent as they used to be, they are not going to get results. So at the federal level, I think, again, we had resource limitations, just as I said at the beginning. The government has a responsibility to do something, and they have been doing quite a lot. Just recently, before we started this program, I had an announcement from the Nigeria Customs Service announcing that I think there's a directive now to the customs to waive import duty on some critical, essential food items and pharmaceutical products. That announcement was made a few hours ago. And we have seen a lot of efforts, about palliatives and all of these things, distribution of rice, but I'm not a big fan of those palliatives, because when you are dealing with a population of 200 million people, there's a limit to how many people you can be handing over palliatives to. What's important is to make the system work, to make the market chain of distribution to be more efficient, and to ensure that system-wide prices are coming down through the reduction in the cost of production. I think that is what needs to happen. Another thing that we probably have omitted, generally both at the subnational and at the federal, is the issue of the sensibility of Nigerians. When you have a situation where there is so much sacrifice that are being made, the way the government also spends money, either for overhead, for personnel, for vehicles, and all of those things, both at the executive level and the legislative level, those things should also come with proper signaling that we are in an austerity mode. But that will help to also bring the citizen to take ownership that we are going through very hard times. But when we are going through this situation and we hear that National Assembly members are buying vehicles of 180 million, these things can inflame anger. It can inflame the people and say, things are getting so tough, and yet people who are supposed to be leading are spending this way. So that disconnection is something that we need to relate with. So the signaling is very important. The fiscal prudence is very important, in order to also signal to the people that this sacrifice is a national sacrifice. It doesn't exclude anybody. The optics, the messaging is very important. And for the subnationals, of course, they have a lot to do. When you talk about food, for instance, the subnationals are closer to the farmers. They are supposed to support with fertilizer, with farming, and some state governments have been doing that. But the problems are quite big, and it has been compounded by this insecurity, which is appearing to be very intractable. We have been battling with this insecurity now for close to 5 to 6 to 10 years. It's an intractable problem because it's a guerrilla warfare. And guerrilla warfare anywhere in the world are not easy to battle, especially for an expansive country like this. So the insecurity problem seems to also have been compounding the problem. The problem with the Niger Delta, oil vendors, and they also compounding the problem of our foreign exchange. So there are so many fires to fight. But that is not to excuse the fact that the government can also do a lot more, along the lines that I've identified.
Mr. Mukhtar Mohammed, Dr. Yusuf has put us again on that line to understand what should be done or what could have been done. I know you also have your views with regards to that. Let's start with palliatives distribution that many will say, how well do you know this will get to the right people? Just recently, again, grains were distributed I think trucks of food stuff were to get to a particular place. But in what way do you think, really, in your thoughts, that government can really get down to those, the vulnerable ones at this time, really? What do you think?
I think Dr. Muda have said it all. In terms of palliative, palliative does not work in an economy that does not have data. Because how do you know, how do you know who's rich? How do you know who's poor? How do you distribute those direct cash transfer? How are you distributing those greens so that they will not be affected? They will not be politicians will not hijack it and become. You must be a party member. We can go on and history. You remember trader money till today? Nothing came out from that. So there's a lot of policy when it comes to intervention that we've not really gotten right. In terms of intervention, you know what happened in the humanitarian ministry. That case is still ongoing. The former minister is also reporting to EFCC billions of nairas. So you realize that we've not done anything new. The register, what's this register? How is the poor of the poor by having 5,000 naira in your account? Is that a better process? Or so there's a lot. Well, palliative in this country does not really work. You remember the COVID-19 issues where even after warehouse we're still having COVID palliative months after COVID has even stopped. So palliative has not really worked because we don't have data. I keep saying data is the key. All the developed countries that drive on palliative drive on data. They look at your tax, they look at your revenue, they look at where you live, they look at your children, how many children you have, what are their obligations. In developed countries, they even go as far as giving you based on the number of children, saying each child will have so amount. So we need to begin to do that. We don't have that. We don't even know how many children are put to bed in Nigeria in daily or talk less of, monthly or yearly, talk less of daily. So it's a big challenge. So I totally agree with what he said. And secondly, I tend to differ a little from Doctor, because when you talk about custom, you see those high turnover because of the value of the exchange rates. Those are what is bringing those high turnover in terms of revenue. But in terms of businesses, very few businesses are doing business through the ports because they cannot have form of this. You talk about car dealers, they no more bring in cars because we are looking at an exchange of 1,500. So when you see in terms of value, but when you look in terms of turnover, you realize that it has gone down. So what they've just seen, they say they've increased it by 127% in terms of customs duties. But that is because the exchange rate is 1,500 or 1,600 compared to when it was about 700. And so if you look at that what they're doing, you can say they've not really done well in terms of that. But in terms of the value, in terms of what it brings to the economy, fine. But in terms of revenue to the economy, and like he said, we concentrate so much in the federal. Nobody's talking about state government. Nobody's talking about federal local government. All we're interested in is what is the president doing. So I think that is a fundamental problem that has been ongoing. And with the increase in revenue, how much have this state government made those revenue impact the life of the ordinary Nigeria? That for me is the bigger issue, because this revenue has come in, but they have not impacted the life of the ordinary Nigerians. Nigerians are still where they used to be. The roads are not different from what they were before the revenue came in. The revenue has gone up. So it's not just the federal. If you look at when the federal says what they have done, you begin to ask yourself, so what is the state actually doing? What is the local government actually doing? So I tend to say that there must be a synergy. When you look at the fiscal policy, you talk about grains, you talk about bag of rice, you talk about interventions. You and I know the state governors. You and I know our average politicians. If this is really meeting the needs of the real people, you will see them pay for advert to tell us how these things are being distributed, We are waiting for CMG buses now. It's almost a year. No, so it's a very tight situation we found ourselves. Like you say, it's not that the policies are not good, but it seems to be the implementation. How do you intervene? How do you put money in the economy? What type of infrastructure do we really need? Do we need all infrastructure? Do we need infrastructure and power? Do we need infrastructure and road? What is the key infrastructure that can drive the economy? Those are what we say, you think outside the box. You try to come up with remedy. I've said it time over again that the government need to take a bite of their revenue in terms of imported household items. And thank God, Mr. President said this. I think this came in like 2 weeks ago, where they said, "Oh, President said he's going to remove duties on the importation of household household items, especially food." We are not seeing that implementation till today again. So sometimes you in a dicey economic situation, time is key. When a policy is announced, implementation should start immediately so that you can feel the impact, because it's going to take some time. If we have started this implementation 2 weeks ago, we'll begin to see the impact 3 weeks ago. So if you start the implementation 2 weeks after, you will not see the impact maybe till 1 month after, and the people will keep complaining. So time is of a necessity when you are trying to intervene or come up with new policies.
Dr. Yusuf, almost on the final note, a press release from the CPP stated that 400 billion naira could be lost if the protests should, go the other way. That's on August 1st. And some advice also around that statement. First, I would ask you, now that we have gotten to this point, what do you think with regards to the proposed or the planned protest? And many are talking about dialogue, many are pulling out. But what is your view generally around this, and what could be the impact on the economy?
Yes, before I respond to that, let me explain properly what I meant through my reference to the customs. I wasn't referring to the revenue increase. I was referring to what Mukhtar said in this last statement about announcement on import duty reduction.
Yeah, import duty.
On food items, on
pharmaceuticals,
intermediate products, pharmaceuticals. He was talking about implementation. And I'm saying that just a few hours ago, the Nigeria Customs Service, who is the main implementation agent, has announced that the president has directed them to implement immediately. So that is what I was referencing. So that means the issue about reducing import duty, because I'm a very strong believer in the use of policy to address this issue, particularly fiscal policies. Even just as Mukhtar said, if we need to trade off revenue, let us trade off revenue to bring some succor to the citizens and to businesses. So this concession that has been given on import duty, particularly for intermediate products, like wheat, like maybe sugar and other things like that, it will go a long way to bring some relief. And even I think there's also paddy rice. It will go a long way to bring relief to the citizens. Lagos State has the biggest rice mill on the continent of Africa. But there's no paddy rice, because all the rice growing areas have been ravaged by insecurity. And many of the rice mills are lying fallow, operating below capacity. And all these gaps create opportunity for smuggling. So if you can get those rice mills working by temporarily allowing some of this paddy rice to come in, it will go a long way to pushing to address this issue of cost of living. So the use of fiscal policy measures, I think, is extremely very important. I also feel that all the critical raw material by all manufacturers, the import duty of them should be reduced drastically so that more of these things can come in, even the vehicles. Now we have been talking about this exchange rate for the computation of import duty. This should be part of the measures at this time that I'm expecting that the government will announce. I checked the portal before coming on this program. Exchange rate for the computation of import is 1,600. That is double whammy. You can't buy exchange rate, you can't buy the dollar at 1,006. You come and clear your cargo at 1,006. That is double jeopardy. You want to appeal to the central bank. This does not in any way undermine the reform in the foreign exchange market. We are not asking them to sell dollar to anybody at a discount rate or at a discounted rate. What we are saying that if anybody brings in any good into the country and they want to clear it, let us use a lesser exchange rate to achieve the objective that the president wants to achieve by bringing down the cost of goods. Because this exchange rate for the computation of import is a major factor in inflation. Because trade is very critical to salvaging the current situation. If trade cost remains very high, it will be difficult to get out of this. So I cannot emphasize this enough. The organized private sector have said it. The Presidential Committee on Fiscal Reforms and Transport have said it. So let us please reduce the exchange rate for the computation of import duty. Let us bring it down to 1,000 or 800. That will reduce smuggling. It will reduce trade diversion. It will improve the cargo throughput, which Mukhtar was referring to. Not many cargo is coming through our ports anymore because of this problem. So that for me is extremely very, very important. Then of course we need to also deal with issues of finance. We know that the CBN has been trying to tame inflation and all of that. That has been pushing up interest rates. We need to expand the development finance window so that people, particularly the real sector, can have access to concessionary financing. BOI is doing its bit, but the Bank of Agriculture is almost moribund. We need to provide finance. I'm not saying we should go back to the regime of anchor borrowers program, but we need to expand the development finance window so that we can have cheaper credit, long-term credit for those in the real sector of the economy, for those in construction, for those in real estate, for those in manufacturing. So these are some of the things I think we need to do more of as a way of dealing with the current situation. And of course, I know that the armed forces are doing a lot around the oil sector area. We hope they can do more, but unfortunately, the problem of insecurity in the Niger Delta and oil theft has become so deeply embedded because it has been there for so many years. So to change that situation is also extremely difficult. So if we see a better traction in terms of improvement in the area of our oil production and all of that, that will also help to deal with these current challenges.
All right. Mr. Mukhtar Mohammed, a parting shot from you as we look ahead for the planned protest. What do you think will be the fallout?
I'm not an advocate of the planned protest because of what you have in our economy. I still say that we should hold our peace and look at what the president will come up with. I expect the president to still come up with reform, like Dr. Muda have said. Some of those reforms are not rocket science. I expect him to be coming up with statements that will douse the tension. Everybody wants, if the president speaks today, if the president speaks tomorrow, the tension that we are experiencing now will come down. I expect that Mr. President should speak to the Nigerian people. They want to hear from him. They don't want to hear from his aide. We've heard so much from his aide. Some of his aides were saying the right thing. Some are saying threatening words. So we need to hear from Mr. President. If Mr. President address Nigerians today or tomorrow, that will also down the tension that we are about to experience. Whether we go on strike or not, whether there's a protest or not, that figure that Dr. Muda said about 400 and something billion will be lost on Thursday if Mr. President does not. I can assure you that a lot of businessmen, a lot of companies will be closing on Thursday. They will tell their staff not to come to work. So that is already a loss. And if the president does not talk and people, after listening to the president, watch what happened on Thursday and decide to go back to work on Friday, it will be a monumental loss for Nigeria. We have not recovered from the NSAS loss. Some businesses are gone. I think my advice is that Mr. President should give a nationwide address to the country and let us know what he's planning to do and what are the duration. Like he said, how you now look at the Dangote thing that they just did. They said they will make sure at a fixed exchange rate. Why can't we do that in the port where imported goods, household goods, mostly food items, mostly children food, milk? I mean, all these things are necessary for the healthy building of our children, we are future generation. The government need to act, and they need to act fast. There is hunger in the land. Let's not deny that fact. But their policies are good. Like Dr. Muda said, if you fix exchange rate at 800 or 1,000, that does not defeat liberalization that you are trying to achieve in the overall foreign exchange market. So please, there are short-term measures, there are long-term measures, there are mid-term measures. For the short-term measure, government take a bite of your revenue and let Nigerians have a little breath of fresh air, and then you can begin to come back and let us begin to see the result of some of those policies. We are not difficult people. We will begin to appreciate.
All right, there.
Everybody's appreciating the president for what he has done with Dangote now. He shows leadership. He showed a man that was listening. He showed a man that, okay, I am the Minister of Petroleum. I'm going to bring out a memo. Nobody saw it coming, and he came out, and everybody's excited about it. We are expecting the same thing to hear from our president. Thank you.
I must thank you so much for this interesting conversation. Dr. Muda Yusuf is the CEO of the Center for the Promotion of Private Enterprises, CPPE, and Mr. Mukhtar Mohammed is the CEO, Finance with Mukhtar. Thank you so much. Do enjoy the rest of your day.